industry. And we have Scott Kaufman-Ross with us today. We have, from the NBA, we have Bill Squadron from Genius Sports. And moderating, we have Mike Barnes from Anders CPN Advisors. So if you guys can go ahead, please.
Well, as Patrick said, this last year has seen extraordinary developments, both in the legal and, as we'll talk with Scott and Bill, on the business front after the recent court decision. Industry experts estimate last year Las Vegas sports books took in $5 billion, just under $5 billion in legal sports betting. Overall estimates place that actual number at 80 to 400 billion. If you look at estimates across all sports. NFL led, basketball followed closely behind second. So our two guests are going to walk us through what these implications now mean, given the court's decision, as well as efforts on the business fronts. Adam Silver sort of led out of the gate, Scott, in terms of announcing the NBA's interest in being involved. So I'll let you sort of open the gate and let us know what the NBA's position is now that it appears the court's laid the groundwork.
Sure. Happy to give some of the background of when Adam took over and how we got from where we were in the early 90s to where we are today. And first of all, I trust that all of you who raised your hands that said you were gambling are over 21 and also are not doing it in the state of Missouri, where sports betting is not currently legal, and are traveling to Vegas or New Jersey. But let's go back a little bit to the early 1990s. There was a federal law passed called the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, or PASPA, as it's discussed in the industry. And that law prohibited states from authorizing sports betting outside of the ones that already had. So Las Vegas, Delaware, and then Montana and Oregon in a smaller capacity had existing sports betting laws, but this federal law prohibited states from passing laws that allowed sports betting beyond that. And the sports leagues were all pushing for this law, and that was because, sports betting does pose a threat to the integrity of our competitions, right? There have been scandals, the Black Sox scandal, the Tim Donaghy scandal, various ones in college sports, people fixing games or manipulating games for the purpose of sports betting. And in the early 90s, we felt the best way to do that was a federal prohibition. 25 years passed, and this little thing called the internet came along. And with the advent of the internet and then smartphones and apps, it became incredibly easy to bet illegally. And so it was clear that that federal prohibition was no longer effective. And Adam Silver, commissioner of the NBA, when he took over for David Stern in 2014, realized this and changed the NBA's position. And our position was, it's clear to us that sports betting is happening. It's happening in large quantities, and it's happening unregulated, unmonitored, and untaxed. And we will actually be in a better position to protect the integrity of our competitions in a regulated market, where it's legal, regulated, it can be monitored, it can be taxed, it can be viewed, we can see what's happening in the data. And so it would actually be in the interest of the integrity of professional sports for sports betting to be legal. Adjacent to that, the state of New Jersey, to help their Atlantic City casinos, said, we want to legalize sports betting and we're going to pass a law. The leagues, given the state of the federal law, said, well, that is in violation of the federal law, and therefore you can't do that. And there was a court case back and forth. That case was appealed all the way up to the Supreme Court, and as mentioned earlier this year in May, the Supreme Court ruled that that law was in fact unconstitutional, and that law was repealed. So now the states have the ability to pass laws as they see fit. And so what we are doing at the league office is we have put together a model piece of legislation that we think is the proper framework for sports betting to be legalized. I should say that we would prefer a federal solution. 50 states passing 50 different laws and having to comply with 50 different sets of regulations and requirements is going to be cumbersome for fans, for operators, for the leagues. And so it would be our preference that there'd be a federal framework. As you may know, there's some things going on in Washington over the last couple of years. Not a lot of legislation is being passed, and so we think the likelihood of that in the interim is fairly low. And so we have been active in the states, since the states are the ones that are taking up this issue right now. And essentially, our position has 5 key components. First is that any law has to protect the integrity of our competitions. So there's a couple of factors there. First, of course, we want anyone who's involved with a sports team or a sports league or a sports organization to be prohibited from participating. Anyone who has access to inside information, like a trainer or a coach or a league official, has more information than the general public, should not be participating. Second, we certainly want to make sure that any investigations that we have to undergo, if we do spot a problem, there is a cooperation from the operators and from the regulators so that we can spot anything that's suspicious. And then third, we want the operators to share with us any data, what we call pseudonymized account level data. So we don't want personal information, but we want to be able to monitor betting activity so we can see anything suspicious. So if we see somebody betting only when a certain ref is is officiating, or if we see someone betting on a very specific prop bet at a specific player, we want to be able to monitor that so we can see anything suspicious. The second component of our legislation is that consumer protections be included, so protections for people who have gambling problems, advertising restrictions so they don't target minors, age verification, things like that need to be included in the regulations. Third, we want there to be only official league data used, and this is a slightly nuanced position, and Bill will speak to it as well. But basically, the data that is used to settle bets, to set odds, et cetera, should come from the league and be verified the league and not be put together by third parties. And we'll delve into what that means in a moment. Fourth is that mobile and internet betting need to be a part of the ecosystem. It's our view that if you only legalize sports betting in the physical casinos, we won't be successful in moving the illegal market into the legal market. We know that's where the vast majority of the betting is happening, and therefore, in order to successfully regulate it and monitor it, we need to allow a competitive market with the illegal market. And the last and the most controversial, which I'm sure we'll get into at the end, is that we think the league should participate in the economics. It's our view that sports betting is happening on the backs of our competitions. We put these games on. The operators then sell these products to the consumers and generate profit. And just like when our games are on television, or just like when you buy an NBA product, if a third party is going to profit off the backs of our competition, we think that we should participate. So that's our league position, and we have been having conversations with state legislators, state regulators, operators themselves, about implementing this framework, whether it be on a state-by-state basis or on a federal framework.
Well, we'll definitely come back to I believe it's the integrity fee.
We don't call it that.
Well, it's a more common nomenclature. But I do want to transition, as Scott said, to the issue of data because, speaking for Genius Sports, there are two elements that you all obviously would focus on, which would be the data collection and, in essence, verification, as well as that data being used to predict potential match fixing and so forth. So I'll let Bill dive into that.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So Genius Sports is a company that's based in London but operates globally. And the core of its business is sports technology, data analytics, and particularly around the global betting markets. Also around media and other things, but really the core origin of the company was around betting markets. And as the law has been being changed here, expanding very rapidly into the United States. And the one thing that all of you here should realize, if you don't already, is that this change in the law, as Scott referred to the Supreme Court's ruling that PASPA was unconstitutional, thus opening up this entire American market, this is going to be transformational. Okay? So what you all know of as the sports industry, it will be significantly affected by the development of the betting markets in this country. And any of you that have been to the UK and gone to a Premier League match where at halftime everybody goes out to the betting stalls and bets on the games and everyone's sitting in the stands on their phones and betting on who's going to score the next goal or whether there'll be a red card in the next 10 minutes, you know what I'm talking about. Okay? So, it's going to take a few years for a lot of the unevenness in the law and regulation to settle out and for the markets to develop. Right now, as Mike alluded, we have, legalization in New Jersey and Mississippi and Delaware and West Virginia. This will be growing over the next couple of years to the point where this will be a major factor in the sports industry. So, have no doubt about that. How exactly it'll unfold, there's still a bunch of different twists and turns, but it will be a major factor. From our standpoint, the data component is critical because data fuels the industry. It's almost like the gasoline that makes it work. So if you're watching a game, and all of you who play fantasy football know this, you can't wait to see that reception show up on your screen and then translate that into points. Okay? Multiply that by 100, and you have a global betting market, which is all being fueled by data that's happening in real time. So when the Cardinals score 3 runs in the bottom of the 6th, that will immediately change the odds on whether the Cardinals are going to win that game, and that will immediately show up, not tomorrow, but in a couple of years, on your screen to allow you to place a bet immediately on the new odds because they just scored 3 runs. Okay? All of that has to be fueled by data, and one of the things we agree with wholeheartedly with the NBA is that it should be fueled by official data, because for the public to have confidence in this new and to some degree unknown betting industry, at least in the US, people need to have confidence. And if it's official data, that will inspire the kind of confidence that will allow people to feel comfortable that their bets are all being settled according to a particular standard and it's an official standard. And then the sort of flip side of that, as Mike just alluded to, is integrity. Commissioner Silver recognized a few years ago there was this huge underground betting market, and that placed potential corruption as a factor no matter what. And we have had scandals even though betting's illegal. So it's not as though now that betting is going to become legal, now there's a risk to the game. That risk exists today. And in fact, by bringing it out into the sunlight, we will be able to monitor it and watch it and address it much more effectively than it has been in the past. Because there is technology, the company that I work with, Genius Sports, and a couple of other companies, have technology that monitors the betting markets worldwide in real time and watches those changes in the odds happening live and is able to spot aberrations, because we have algorithms that will say that if Arsenal is tied with Chelsea 1-1, with 23 minutes left, the odds should be at a particular place based on huge volumes of data and historical knowledge about where those odds should be. If suddenly those odds shift significantly because somebody has placed a large bet in a way that really is unpredictable, that will immediately flag an alert and prompt a further investigation. Okay? And that's being done, as we're all sitting here today, that's being done constantly on thousands and thousands of matches all over the world via this technology. And that's the kind of technology that we will bring to the US with organizations like the NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball, PGA Tour, and others to make sure that people have complete comfort that we're doing everything possible to monitor the activity and ensure as much as possible, because we're dealing with human nature after all, but to deal as much as possible with protecting the integrity of the sport.
Scott, from the NBA's perspective, as Bill suggested, we're probably 1 to 3 years away as the states begin to fall like the dominoes, whether there is ever federal legislation. Where do you see the NBA's next steps? What do you see coming as this is legalized in some states, not others? How does the NBA see this evolving in the short term?
Sure. Well, first, I'd say it's probably more like 3 to 5 years than 1 to 3. There are only 6 states right now with legalized sports betting, and that will likely be the case for the start of this coming season. I think next year you will see a number of states pass laws, but each state, gaming is a highly political issue, and there are nuances. There are issues with tribal gaming. There are issues whether or not you need a constitutional amendment. Then there are fights between the racetracks and the casinos and the state lottery over who can offer sports betting and how. And so I think it will probably take a longer period of time. And it's an important thing to note that PASPA was repealed, which lifts a prohibition on sports betting, but it's still not legal in most of the country. It will be over time, but it's going to be a slow ramp. It's going to take time for states to pass laws. It's going to take time for consumer behavior to change, for people to stop betting illegally with their bookies or offshore sites and start betting legally. So I completely agree with Bill. It's going to be transformational, but it's also not going to happen overnight. In terms of what our next steps are, we have a number of different work streams that we're working on. One is the sort of legislative front, where we're working with state legislatures, the federal government, about any legislation that's put in pass, that it's sensible, that it protects the interest of our fans and our sport. Another is that we're working with our teams and our broadcast partners to make sure that this is done properly during the rollout. We don't want teams doing partnerships with sports books when it's not legal in their state. It doesn't really make sense for the fan. We want to work with our broadcasters. We're not sure that year one, when it's only legal in 6 states, that our broadcast should be littered with sports betting references and what's appropriate and what's not, what type of advertising is okay to take and what is not. Those are things we're working through with our partners and our teams. And then the other piece is we are starting to do commercial deals. And this is, obviously this is coming. We're trying to put ourselves in position, and these commercial deals can help us both from a revenue perspective as well as an integrity perspective. And so we announced a partnership back in July with MGM to be our official gaming partner. And so they will have the right to use NBA marks and logos. They'll be promoted from our assets. They have the right to use the designation official gaming partner. They've also agreed to all of our integrity protection asks. They'll be sharing data with us. They'll be using official league data. And that deal is non-exclusive. And we are looking to do deals like that with every major operator in the country. And our goal there is to make it very clear to our fans where the safe legal operators are versus the illegal operators. And we have a problem right now. How many people here listen to Bill Simmons' podcast? Fair amount of hands. So if you listen to Bill Simmons' podcast this week, you would have heard in back-to-back ads an ad for FanDuel and an ad for MyBookie. FanDuel is a legal regulated company in this country. They offer daily fantasy. They have licenses for sports betting in West Virginia and New Jersey, rolling out in Mississippi soon, and daily fantasy licenses in 19 states, doing things the right way, totally appropriate and proper. They're a partner of ours. MyBookie is an offshore, illegal, unregulated company based out of Costa Rica that is accepting bets illegally in the United States. And the fan has no idea about those two different things. They hear sports betting's legal, they hear an ad on a popular podcast, they assume it's legal. And so we can help with that distinction by licensing our data only to legal operators, by licensing our intellectual property only to legal operators, by accepting advertising and promoting only legal operators. And so, in some places in the world, they do these big exclusive partnerships of, with one company and align themselves with one brand. Day one, we don't think that's the right approach because we really want to make it clear who the good guys are and who the bad guys are in the market for the first few years.
To that end, Bill, so the economics on your end, so how do you see that play out when you look at entities like that now, just as Scott said, trying to position themselves to take advantage? Maybe an entity like that that's offshore that wants to become licensed, legal, using your data. How does Genius Sports play through that?
Well, Genius Sports has always had a philosophy really from the beginning, and this is a global position because it's not just Costa Rica and the U.S., it's other territories like China and India where betting is illegal, but you have a large number of illegal operators that face in. We've always taken the position that we will only work with regulated, licensed bookmakers in territories where it's permitted. Unfortunately, others have provided data to some of these offshore bookmakers that are facing into unregulated territories, and that has to be, over time through education and hopefully through the legality and bringing it out into the open, curtailed and hopefully eventually eliminated. But that has been an issue, and it's something that needs constant addressing, and people need to highlight it the way that the NBA is doing with the kind of structure that they're putting to their deals. I think it will take a little bit of time, but the major brands like a FanDuel, like an MGM, like a Caesars, that have casinos all over the country that will be providing sports betting opportunities everywhere, people will over time begin to recognize that these are companies that they can trust. I mean, if you bet with an offshore bookmaker, you're putting your money into an account, potentially in the Cayman Islands, and if something happens, that money's gone. I mean, you're taking a big risk. Okay, people have done it because they like to bet. But hopefully, fairly quickly, they'll recognize that betting in a legal, safe, regulated environment is going to be a lot smarter to do.
To that end as well, regarding the data. So this was one of the questions when we were first sort of setting up the discussion today. So where does the NBA and its outside partners, in this case, somebody like Genius Sports, the ability to position the data for, in the case of the gambling community, proposition bets, unique, so forth. How does the NBA view that? And obviously, you've already said you plan on tightly controlling that, but walk us through what you think in terms of the data being available to fans and what kind of new entertainment that provides them.
Sure. So I'll explain for this group a little bit the difference between unofficial data and official data. I think it'll help bring it to light. Historically, in a place like Nevada or in Vegas where you could bet on sports, you're not betting in-game, you're not betting on props. It's primarily just the money line, the spread, the over-under, parlays, derivatives of those things, where only the outcome, the final score of the game matters. And for that data is relatively easy to get, right? Everybody knows what the score is. You can go to ESPN.com. It doesn't matter. But when you start betting on things in-game, during live gameplay, when you start betting on prop bets on things like assists and steals and eventually home run distance and player speed and things like that, that's where the validity and the speed of the data is essential. So in the UK, 70+% of all betting is done during live gameplay, in-game betting. In Nevada, it's been less than 5%. It just hasn't happened yet in the US. And the speed is crucial for the following reason. Unofficial data will primarily be taken, just somebody is watching the game on television and is sitting there and just creating their own data feed. They're logging what's happening, and then they're selling that to third parties. Well, the broadcast is delayed, right? The broadcast delay can be 7 seconds, 15 seconds. If you're watching on satellite, it can be like 3 minutes. If you're watching over the top, it can be 5 minutes. I mean, it's pretty delayed. And you can imagine for in-game betting with the nuances of how the score is changing and what that does for the odds. If you score a touchdown, the meaningful difference that has on the odds. Basketball, there are 220 points per game, and the amount of events that shift that and shift momentum, a steal, a third foul in the first quarter on a key player. Those types of things have meaningful differences in the odds, and a 10 to 15 second delay can be the world of difference for an odds maker and for a bettor. And so our data is collected on site in real time, actually using a Genius Sports software system, and then distributed immediately to the bookmaker so that their odds are real time, their odds are up to speed, and within sub 1 second, you're getting the latest information. The odds are being calculated based on that data. And as in-play betting goes from less than 5% to 70%, that's going to be crucial for the fans, for the operators, for the regulators, for everyone. The other piece of it is the validity, which will matter a lot more when you start betting on these prop bets or these other types of markets. So I'll give you a perfect example. In baseball, ground ball goes off the shortstop's glove into center field. Is that a hit or an error? The official scorer gets to decide. And a lot of people know there's hometown scoring sometimes, and they score it one way, but it doesn't matter. That is the official record of the league. When you look in the box score, that's what it is. If you have a third party collecting official data, unofficial data, they might come to a different conclusion. They might say, oh, that looked like an error, I'm going to call it an error. All of a sudden, somebody with a prop bet over under 2 errors has just been paid out. Then they look at the box score and say, wait a minute, that was a hit, that wasn't an error. And they're going to be very confused about why they got paid out or why their money was taken. And when you have an official record of the league, when you have an actual valid statistic, and people are putting their money on the line, it needs to be that. And so that's why we feel so strongly that the official data be used, not just from a commercial perspective, but from an integrity perspective and a consumer protection perspective.
I mean, we couldn't agree more. And I know this may sound foreign to a lot of you, but this is really what people will be doing in fairly short order, is betting on these things in game. I mean, it's coming for sure, and it's unbelievably popular outside the United States. Scott said more than 70% of bets. And if you think about the scale we're talking about, in August alone, the first month that New Jersey reported figures for betting handle, there was nearly $100 million, $95 million was bet in the state of New Jersey in August, okay? And of course, football is going to be the biggest driver initially, and football was barely getting started with preseason. But you have one state where you have virtually no, there's a little bit, but virtually no mobile or online activity. Almost all physical locations and casinos. $100 million, one state, just getting started. No marketing, no in-game activity, nothing. So if you have any doubt about the potential scale of where this is going, just look at one state, 1 month, just getting going, and you're talking about nearly $100 million.
In a month with only one professional major sport active, too.
Well, I would like to offer up. Anyone like to ask any of our panelists a question? Oh, goodness. Well, I saw you first right here.
How concerned is the league office about another cap spike, given especially the union's public statements on rejecting smoothing?
Well, I don't think the cap spike happened because the national TV money came all in 1 year, right? It was the end of our prior national TV deal, and there was a significant jump in that 1 year. As you called out, we had a proposal to the union where you would smooth in that cap increase over time. And what happened in that 1 year, for those of you who are unclear, is players got abnormally large contracts in that year because a lot of teams had a lot of available cap space. A lot of that cap space was used up in that first year or two, and so that it has sort of regressed now. But I don't envision that happening with regards to sports betting because it will be so much more gradual. There won't be this one moment where all of a sudden $1 billion comes into the system. Certainly, we do think that there will be benefits, from engagement. There will be benefits, sponsorship, media, but especially given the state-by-state nature of this and the gradual time period it's going to take for this to come into the legal market, the revenue generation itself will be much more gradual, and so I don't think that's a concern here.
We have one more question.
So companies like FanDuel and DraftKings have gotten by the law by claiming that they're games of skill rather than chance. Do you think that traditional sports books have a similar path to legalization, that it'll help them get legalized?
No, it'll be different. So FanDuel and DraftKings were operating for daily fantasy basically in a federal carve-out that was in the Unlawful Internet Gambling and Enforcement Act that said that fantasy games, if they were games of skill, were exempt from that prohibition. For a while, they did operate sort of outside of the regulatory regime only because there was no regulatory regime. However, since sort of 2015, when a lot of the headlines came out about daily fantasy, attorneys general in various states kind of challenged the legality, there have been laws passed in 19 states legalizing daily fantasy, and in every state where they can, FanDuel and DraftKings have applied for licenses. With regards to sports betting, which is viewed as a separate gaming category than daily fantasy, they will all be only operating where they can acquire a license. And sports betting, and those of you who are really good or doing analytics, we could debate about whether or not that is a game of skill, but at least in state legislatures, it is not viewed as a game of skill, it's viewed as a game of chance, and therefore there's a separate license that needs to be obtained. And FanDuel and DraftKings are only operating sports books in states where it is legal and they've acquired a license to do so.
Right, and over time, daily fantasy will get swamped by betting, so that part of it will become moot.
Well,
Let's give it up for this
Scott.
panel.
Thank you to Bill. Thank you.